My name is Rowan Blake, Major General. 4 tours, 3 stars. But last Thursday at 0800 hours, I was told, sorry, ma'am, you're not on the list. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a clerical error. It was deliberate. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I stood outside Gate 3 at Wright-Patterson in full dress blues, ribbons sharp, posture straighter than the men who saluted them. Inside, they were setting up for a ceremony I was never invited to, one that bore my family's name, my brother's promotion. I didn't come for recognition. I didn't come to cause a scene. I came because somewhere, deep down, a part of me still hoped someone would say, "I'm glad you're here." But no one did. Not my mother, not my brother, not the sister-in-law who called me invisible behind perfectly glossed lips. So I turned. One step, one breath. That should have been the end. Until the SUV pulled up, black windows, diplomatic plates. And when the door opened, the entire base stopped breathing. Because the man who stepped out wasn't here for Brandon. He was here for me. And when he said my name, not as a guest, not as a favor, but as a general, the room that erased me stood. Not out of guilt, not out of habit, but because they had no choice anymore. And that was the beginning of everything they'll never be able to forget. Let me tell you how we got there. The early summer sun was harsh for 0800 hours, the kind that made metals glint too sharply and starch lines on dress blues look cartoonishly crisp. I stood alone in front of Gate 3 at Wright-Patterson, the scent of asphalt and clipped grass mixing with jet fuel and formal anticipation. Across the base, banners were already being hoisted. Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Blake. Promotion ceremony, June 2024. My younger brother, the golden child. I hadn't RSVP'd because family doesn't need to. Or so I believed. I kept my hands loose by my sides, even as the young airman in front of me, Morales, his badge said, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He'd already run my name twice. Checked the digital manifest, then the printed copy. Ma'am, I really am sorry. Maybe if someone could vouch. You don't need to apologize, I said calmly, as if I hadn't already seen this moment coming from 10,000 miles away. You're following orders. He nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. But I saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. It always confused them. People like him. The ones who had only ever heard the name Major General Rowan Blake from an article, a speech, or a citation on the Pentagon wall. They didn't expect her to be standing here, locked out like an uninvited distant cousin. I turned slightly, enough to see down the stretch of road leading to the inner compound. White folding chairs, flag stands, and a red-white-blue canopy were being set up in the main quad. Even from here, I could see the grandeur. Then came the voice. Sharp, syrupy. Brandon said she might try to crash it. Amanda. She stood half-turned, several feet behind the gate, but close enough for me to hear. Her blonde hair was twisted into a bun that screamed West Point fantasy. Her lips moved with performative shock, but her eyes were cold, amused. She whispered something to the woman next to her, presumably her mother, then turned back toward the ceremony site, heels striking the concrete like punctuation. I didn't flinch. I'd trained myself for worse. Foreign dignitaries, classified hearings, hostile territories. But this quiet surgical exclusion, it cut deeper. I looked for my mother, not because I needed rescue, but because I needed confirmation. And there she was. Caroline Blake, pale pink coat, white clutch, pearl necklace, of course. She stood with her back to me, speaking to someone in uniform, probably one of Brandon's generals, without a single glance toward the gate. She must have walked past me, chosen not to see me. Jaden Morales cleared his throat again. Ma'am, the ceremony starts in 20. If you'd like to wait over by the visitor lot. No need, I said. His posture stiffened, uncertain. I gave him a small nod. Permission to stop trying. Amanda passed the threshold. Caroline followed. Brandon wasn't in sight yet, but I imagined he was inside, rehearsing his perfectly modest acceptance speech and posing for a photographer with the stars and stripes in the background. I stepped back. Just one step. The kind that says, "Understood. You've made your point." "Have a good morning, ma'am," Jaden said quietly. I didn't answer. I turned fully now, facing the outbound road. The sun was higher, warmer. I adjusted my cover, smoothed the front of my jacket, then began walking. And that's when I heard it. A low, deliberate rumble. Behind me, a black SUV slowed to a crawl as it approached the checkpoint. The tint on the windows was nearly black, but the diplomatic plates were unmistakable. Not civilian, not command. Something else entirely. Jaden's voice shifted from politeness to protocol. "Sir, I'll need to see your ID." The window rolled down 2 inches, and whatever was shown made Jaden's spine lock upright. I didn't turn back. Not yet. Because whatever that SUV meant, whoever was inside, it wasn't my family. It was something bigger. And for the first time that morning, I wasn't entirely sure who had shown up. For me, I didn't come to make a scene. I came to clap, even if no one clapped for me. The parking lot smelled like hot pavement and distant ambition. I sat in the rental, engine off, watching the bass buzz with ceremonial precision. Honor guards marched, flags rippled. Somewhere, a brass band rehearsed a slow rendition of America the Beautiful. My name had never sounded right in those kinds of songs. I ran my thumb along the hem of my uniform sleeve. The stitching was clean. Pressed just last night in a hotel room with no iron board, no champagne bottle chilling in a bucket, no congratulations text on my phone. Just silence, the kind I'd memorized. The ache in my chest wasn't rage. It was remembered. And the worst part? I still hoped someone might say, "I'm glad you came." That hope was always the most dangerous part of me. Memory's strange. It doesn't knock. It just lets itself in. I was 10 when Brandon got picked for the school science fair, for a project I'd helped him build. Mom baked cupcakes. Dad carried the trifold display board. I stood in the audience, clapping. No one mentioned I'd designed the circuitry. At 13, I won a regional writing contest. Mom smiled, distracted. Brandon came in 3rd at a swim meet that weekend. We threw him a pizza party. At 16, Dad died. I didn't cry at the funeral. I couldn't. I was too busy watching everyone comfort Brandon. His sobs loud, dramatic. Mine were internal and invisible. The only person who ever saw me was 6 feet under. By 17, I was accepted into West Point. A full ride, a call from the commandant himself. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the envelope, my heart rattling like a coin in a tin cup. Caroline looked up from her tablet, nodded and said, "That's good, honey. Can you pick Brandon up from lacrosse?" He didn't even have practice that day. She just didn't want to talk about it. Even at 28, when I made Colonel ahead of schedule, when my face showed up in stars and stripes, the silence from my family was louder than any headline. Then last week, her post. "So proud of my baby boy, soon-to-be Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Blake." 3 exclamation points. A photo. Brandon in dress blues, Amanda beside him. My mother's hand on his chest like he was the nation's next hope. No mention of me. That post is what made me book the flight. Not an invitation, not even a message. Just a photo, just the ache, and the irrational belief that maybe showing up would mean something. I rested my head back against the seat, eyes tracing the outline of the base entrance across the lot. Jaden was still at his post, the SUV still parked at the checkpoint. Silent, powerful, diplomatic plates. I hadn't meant to stare, but I couldn't look away. A door clicked. The black SUV door opened. First came the polished tip of a dress shoe, then a gloved hand, marked with age but steady. The sleeve followed, rich midnight blue with gold trim, and then it caught the light, the insignia glinting on the shoulder. 3 stars. I exhaled, slow. The kind of breath you take when the world's about to pivot, and you're not sure whether to brace or salute. Because whoever that was, they weren't here for Brandon. And they weren't just passing through. They'd come for something. Or someone. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself wonder. Was it me? General Blake? The voice wasn't surprised. It was respectful, and loud enough for Amanda to hear. Lieutenant General Marcus Talbot didn't walk so much as command the pavement. The air shifted the moment his boot touched asphalt. A man like that didn't need to clear his throat or raise his voice. Presence alone was enough. He didn't hesitate, didn't scan. His eyes landed on me with surgical precision. He knew exactly who I was. Jaden Morales blinked. His posture straightened, not by instinct, but survival. Talbot stepped past the airman and extended his hand, not as a greeting, but as a salute in gesture. His gloved hand hovered for a beat before he said, "Colonel Rowan Blake?" "No, I hear I should now say General Blake." I returned his handshake with a grip steady from a decade of field briefings. My lips didn't part. They didn't need to. Talbot's words were carrying farther than we stood. Amanda was frozen halfway through the gate, one heel still raised, caught between steps. Caroline stood just behind her, hand to her necklace like it might strangle her. Roth arrived next. Brigadier General Adam Roth, commander of the base, red in the face but quick on protocol. His gait betrayed urgency. His voice did not. "My apologies, General Blake. It appears there was a clerical oversight. Escort her to VIP seating immediately." He didn't look at Jaden when he said it, but Jaden's salute was instant. And trembling. I'm sorry, ma'am. I should have... It wasn't your error, I said quietly, stepping forward. My boots didn't echo like Amanda's had, but they landed heavier. Certain. I passed her without glancing. No pause, no smirk. Just the sound of generals behind me and the gate swinging open without resistance. The kind of opening that didn't come from permission, but from rank. We moved together, 3 across, a silent battalion of recognition. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with ceremony. An announcer rehearsed names. Staff officers checked cue cards. Brass uniforms lined the walls, medals like constellations. Families chatted in low tones, the air tinged with cologne and nervous pride. Until the doors opened. Talbot stepped first. Roth next. Then me. Silence wasn't commanded. It emerged. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned slowly like they weren't sure what they were seeing. But recognition came fast. You don't mistake 3 stars unless you're blind. And if you're not blind, you don't miss the woman walking beside them in full dress blues, ribbons heavy, stride unbroken. Someone stood. Then another. Then another. No applause. Just the rustling sound of bodies rising. Respect without rehearsal. Talbot nodded toward the center aisle. We walked. Each step forward was a chapter being rewritten. I could feel Caroline's breath hitch behind me. Amanda sat stiff, her spine pressed to the seat as if it might protect her from what the room now knew. Rowan Blake wasn't an afterthought. She was a general. At the front row, a young woman with a headset leaned toward Roth. He murmured something brief, clipped. Her eyes widened. "Seat her in the front row," Roth said without waiting for a reply. I took the seat without hesitation. Amanda, 3 rows back, didn't speak, but her fingers dug into the armrest like she might fall off the earth. "Before we begin," the commander said, "there's someone in this room who outranks every one of us and earned that right the hard way." Brigadier General Roth's voice carried smoothly through the auditorium, bolstered by a sound system designed for protocol, not praise. The hush that followed wasn't silence. It was suspension. You could feel the shift in air pressure, the collective breath people forgot to take. I kept my posture neutral, hands clasped lightly in my lap, shoulders level. But I felt it. The pull of every eye, the invisible gravity drawing toward me even before he said my name. Major General Rowan Blake, Roth continued, glancing only briefly in my direction, is with us this morning. You may have heard the name, but allow me to make it impossible to forget. A few heads turned more fully now, confirming. Whispers moved like currents across the room. Amanda stiffened 2 rows behind me, her legs crossed so tightly they shook. Caroline sat beside her, spine rigid, lips pressed to a line. I stared forward. Still. General Blake's service record includes 4 overseas deployments, 2 Joint Task Force commendations, and her leadership as NATO liaison during Operation Solstice. She was the first female to lead the 139th Expeditionary Sustainment Command, and the youngest to achieve the rank of Major General in our unit's history. He paused. Let it land. And when her family didn't clap, the world did. That last line wasn't in any official script, but Roth let it sit, like an open challenge. I felt the spotlight before I saw it. That sharp cone of stage light that suddenly existed in a space where none had before. My dress blues glinted faintly. My medals caught it all, as if they'd waited their whole lives for a beam this honest. Then a rustle. One person stood. Lieutenant Column Shana Rivera, my former logistics officer. No hesitation, no sideways glance for permission. She stood straight, heels together, hands at her sides. Then she clapped. Once, twice, and then steady. Applause isn't subtle, especially in a room like this. Formal, ceremonial, trained to wait for cues. But this was different. Raw, respectful, earned. The ripple started. Rivera's row stood, then the left aisle, then the officers near the back. By the time Roth stepped aside, half the auditorium was upright. The rest followed. Whether out of duty, decency, or discomfort, I couldn't say. But they stood. Even Amanda. She was the last of her row. Her hands barely moved at first, but her eyes were locked on the live streaming camera bolted near the ceiling. She knew. The world was watching. Caroline didn't clap, but she stood. That was enough. For now, I didn't rise. Not right away. I let them keep it. The applause wasn't for show. It was a reckoning. Then, slowly, I got to my feet. Talbot turned toward me from his spot on the edge of the stage, voice low but audible. Ma'am, he said, nodding, your presence honors us. I gave the smallest nod in return. Silent. Still. Finally visible. And behind the velvet curtain, Brandon Blake waited for his name to be called. But no one was looking that way yet. Brandon stepped onto the stage, but the applause had already faded. The room had already moved on. He walked like a man used to praise. Chin high, stride rehearsed. But the energy had shifted. The crowd that once would have leaned forward in admiration now sat with polite posture, restrained hands. No one whispered his name. The excitement had already been spent. And not on him. I watched from the front row, my expression unreadable. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. The kind that comes when the room finally sees you for what you've always been. And what they've never noticed. The pinning was precise. A silver eagle pressed to his shoulder with ceremony and flashbulbs. His jaw tensed slightly when he looked down and caught my eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. Amanda clapped with forced rhythm, her hands tighter than necessary. The lines at the corners of her mouth trembled with effort. But what betrayed her wasn't her applause. It was the silence that followed it. No one turned to her. No one offered congratulations. I caught a young officer glancing at her, then quickly away, murmuring something to the woman beside him. Phones were out. Not for Brandon, but for snapshots of the moment earlier. Rivera's ovation, Talbot's words, the general in the front row. After the ceremony, the mingling began, as it always does. Coffee urns, polite cheese cubes, awkward handshakes. Brandon stood beside Amanda, smiling thinly as guests approached. But most didn't stay long. They offered stiff nods, congratulations, then excused themselves. The ones who lingered, They came to me. A colonel from Fort Hood asked how I managed the NATO negotiations without language parity. A young logistics captain told me she'd read my policy paper on decentralized command systems. Two older men simply shook my hand and said, "It's an honor." Rivera approached last. No pomp, no rank talk, just her voice, low and level. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said, "but I'm glad you were. You gave the rest of us permission to show up." I met her gaze. "You never needed my permission." "Maybe not," she replied, "but we needed the reminder." Her words landed heavier than any metal, because I knew what she meant. Showing up as yourself in uniform, as a woman, as a voice never amplified, had always required more than courage. It required witnesses. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Caroline watching. She stood alone now. Brandon was busy looking at the door like it might save him from this new atmosphere. Amanda had vanished, likely to regroup. But Caroline stayed rooted, eyes on me, and the circle forming around me. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. Just stood. I didn't offer her anything to step into. Then came the smallest shuffle of boots. Jaden Morales, the young airman from the gate, approached slowly, his uniform still crisp, posture tight. He stopped 3 feet from me, straightened, then saluted. "General Blake," he said, voice barely steady, "I owe you an apology." I looked at him, not past him, not around him, at him, and waited. I was never on their list, but that day I was in every frame, and not one of them could crop me out. The sun had shifted slightly by the time I stepped back into the parking lot. Its light no longer felt so clinical. It spilled across the pavement like a quiet approval, catching the edge of my shoes, my shadow long and unbent. Brandon stood a few yards ahead, hands jammed into the pockets of his dress slacks. He looked unsure. A stance I'd never seen from him before. For a moment, his eyes met mine. His lips parted slightly, like he might speak. But he didn't. I didn't break stride. Amanda stood just past him, her back to a row of parked sedans, phone raised to her face. Her thumb flicked across the screen in mechanical bursts. Checking damage, no doubt. Her expression was blank, except for the faint crease between her brows. That line I knew wasn't going anywhere. Then came the click of boots, hurried, unsure. "Ma'am," Jaden said, catching up beside me. He hesitated, then offered an envelope with both hands, his posture stiff but respectful. It's from me, not the base. I just thought you should have it." I took it without a word, saluted lightly in return, and kept walking. The airport wasn't far, a 30-minute drive through civilian roads and post-event traffic. No one followed. No one called. And for once, I didn't need them to. At the terminal, I moved through security with the fluid detachment of someone trained not to linger. Metal case in my carry-on. Orders in my jacket pocket. Memories in the creases of my uniform. On board, I found my seat by the window. 14A. The engine hummed low. The aisle filled. Then quieted. Takeoff rolled beneath us like a memory being shaken loose. 10,000 feet later, I opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet, no header, no sign-off. Just words, honest, compressed, and clumsy in a way that made them real. I didn't know women like you could exist in this job. You didn't have to say anything. You just showed up. Thank you for not disappearing. I read it twice. Then folded it once, carefully, and placed it beside my ribbons in the interior pocket of my jacket. I didn't cry. Not exactly. But something settled inside me. Something long unsettled. This wasn't about my mother's silence, or Amanda's whisper, or even Brandon's non-apology. This was about a kid who stood at a gate and saw me. Really saw me. And told me I mattered. In his own way. That was enough. Outside the window, the base was already a patchwork of lines and roofs, shrinking beneath clouds. I leaned back, shut my eyes for a breath, then opened them again. The landscape rolled on, but I didn't. I'd arrived. I'd been seen. I'd made no demands and left no doubt. And as the clouds swallowed the past behind me, I whispered just loud enough for myself to hear. They'll never forget what they saw. They didn't see me. Not when I made the honor roll in 9th grade and stood beside Brandon, who got an honorable mention in gym class. Not when I stood at the West Point admissions board with trembling hands, letter in hand, and my mother said, "Don't forget to send a card to your brother. He's nervous about his SATs." Not even when I deployed overseas for the first time, sleeping in tents with sand curling into my socks, while Caroline posted brunch photos with Amanda, captioned, "So proud of my future daughter-in-law." I was always around. Just not counted. For years, I told myself that wasn't the point. That maybe love wasn't always visible. That maybe being needed wasn't the same as being noticed. I kept showing up. Quietly, competently, with polished boots and sealed lips. I earned medals no one in my family asked about. Attended funerals where the flags were folded into my chest. Got promoted in war zones while my mother mailed cookies to Brandon for his training exercises. And yet, I kept showing up, even when my name was never on the list. That morning at Wright-Patterson, standing outside a ceremony I wasn't invited to, I had no plan. I didn't come to demand a seat. I didn't come to lecture or expose or scream. I came in uniform with my rank and my restraint, and for once, I let them carry the weight of their choices. Then the SUV pulled up. When General Talbot stepped out, everything shifted. Suddenly, people moved. Suddenly, gates opened. Suddenly, silence wrapped around those who once talked over me. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. I didn't glare. I didn't gloat. I stood still, nodded once, and walked forward, not toward them, but past them. And that was the turning point. Inside the auditorium, no one could unsee it. The rank, the respect, the way General Talbot called me by name, my name with gravity, the way the room stood when my record was read aloud. Not because I asked them to, but because my presence made it necessary. Amanda looked like she was calculating how to crop me out of the frame. Caroline looked like she was trying to shrink into hers. I said nothing. Because sometimes silence is louder than accusation. Sometimes just existing in the space they tried to erase you from is the clearest declaration of all. Brandon walked out onto that stage, full of medals and expectations, but the applause had already faded. The room had turned. He smiled, but it didn't stick. He looked down at me from the stage, and for the first time in decades, I didn't look up. I stood in that front row, not as his sister. Not as someone trying to belong, but as someone who already did. Afterward, they came. The officers, the soldiers, even the young airmen from the gate who had once told me I wasn't on the list. They came with nods, handshakes, and thanks. One of them, Rivera, whispered, "You gave the rest of us permission to show up." That one sentence hit deeper than any family compliment ever could. Later, at the curb outside the terminal, I saw Brandon step forward like he might speak. He didn't. I didn't wait. I had nothing left to wait for. Jaden Morales, nervous and stiff, held out an envelope. "It's not official," he said, but I needed to say it. On the plane, 30,000 feet above the base that once didn't want me, I opened it. Handwritten. Careful block letters. Smudged where a hand might have paused. I didn't know women like you could exist in this job. You didn't have to say anything. You just showed up. Thank you for not disappearing. That's when the tears pricked, but didn't fall. I folded the letter and placed it beside my ribbons. Then I leaned back, stared out the window, and let the silence settle into something softer. For the first time, I didn't need to be seen. I already was. And that is the story the world saw. Not a woman who begged to be let in, but a soldier who walked in anyway, with or without their permission. She didn't raise her voice or slam the door. She simply stood where they couldn't ignore her anymore, and that was enough. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. Because when truth walks in, no one gets to look away. They didn't see me. Not when I earned my stars. Not when I carried silence like armor. Not when I stood at the gate with ribbons that outweighed their approval. But that day, they saw. Not because I demanded to be noticed, but because truth, when it walks in with proof and presence, cannot be ignored. If you've ever stood outside a room you helped build, if you've ever been left off the list, erased from the frame, or applauded only in your absence, let this be your reminder. You don't need their permission to matter. You don't need their validation to rise. You just need to keep showing up. Steady, silent, and unshakably real. Because justice doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in on polished boots, speaks with no apology, and rewrites the room by simply existing. Thank you for walking with me through this story. For every second you spent here, reading, watching, remembering, thank you. Because stories like these aren't just about one person. They're about all of us. All the women, all the soldiers, all the people who were told to wait their turn. And finally realized they were the reason the room had shape in the first place. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments, when was the moment you knew you weren't invisible anymore? And if you've ever been underestimated, by family, by command, by the world, hit that subscribe button. Because your voice matters. And here, we don't forget the ones who were left out. This wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. And the room finally understood who was standing in it. Thank you. I see you. And I'm honored you stayed.